Hi, folks. Welcome to Israel Explained. Coming at you a little bit later today, but there's been a lot of developments and there's a lot to talk about. So let's get right to it. So what we're going to talk about today is how the tensions within the Netanyahu government are turning into a real problem with um, getting the post-war order right after this Gaza conflict. And as we've discussed in this show before, I think the political element and the diplomatic element following the war are just as important as the military component, and winning the war without getting the diplomatic part of the war right is going to be very difficult, if not impossible. Now, I've been a critic of Netanyahu for a very long time. Used to be somewhat of a supporter of his in the distant past. Worked for him at one point in my life, but over recent years, I felt that he's been very self-centered to the point of sometimes neglecting the national interest of the country. Now, Netanyahu always knows better, which is what makes it very frustrating. But when this war started, I made a decision, which I don't regret, to support Netanyahu during the war because I want the war effort to succeed. And Netanyahu has done, all things considered, quite well in running the war effort. I think that when you look at the military component of this operation, it's generally been successful, and I'm not sure another prime minister would have done better. So I'm fairly happy with that. But now I have serious concerns over the way he's managing the post-war transition, or really, to be more accurate, the way he's not managing the post-war transition at all. So over the last few days, reports have come in that the heads of the security services have asked to meet with Netanyahu over the day after, because a lot of preparations are needed in order to figure out what sort of political vision Israel has for what will happen after the war. After all, the the high intensity section of this war is about to end. Some report that it'll end soon. Some report that it'll end towards the end of January. But either way, we're less than a month away from that happening. Israel also needs to negotiate with several stakeholders what that future will look like. And right now, it doesn't have a clear position. It has a bunch of no's, a bunch of things that it doesn't want. It doesn't have any vision of what it does want. So that's why the heads of the Mossad, the Shin Bet, and the IDF have asked to meet with him in order to discuss it. Netanyahu turned them down three times. On the fourth time, he managed to put an appointment together, and it was scheduled for the 28th, which is today. Um, Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister and the head of the National Religious Party, threw a fit and gathered a meeting of his party, and through various messengers said that he's considering quitting the government. The meeting was canceled again. Netanyahu scheduled the meeting for the wider cabinet, not the wartime cabinet, instead. That means that individuals like Smotrich, individuals like Ben-Gvir, and various flame-throwing Likud members of Knesset will be there. If you've been following this show or following news from Israel in general, you know that these wider cabinet meetings are dysfunctional, deeply dysfunctional. There are leaks from everyone. Uh, every member seems to be posturing over who can say the more extreme things. A lot of members of the cabinet who are otherwise relatively reasonable from the Likud are swayed and start moving to the right. It's not a forum where decisions can be made and discussions can be had. That's just fact. That's aside from the fact that some of these members, like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, don't want a meaningful diplomatic day after. But it's also a dysfunctional forum. So on some level, discussing it on that forum is another decision not to discuss it at all. In fact, with the vocal opposition that some of these members of the government are going to kind of vocalize, it makes some kind of resolution less likely rather than more likely. And there's other elements as well that are making this government seem more and more dysfunctional, right? Already talked about, it's worth mentioning again that Ben-Gvir has decided to not reappoint the chief of the prison services, trying to also replace the chief of the police. Both of those things go against the government agreement, a very important element in the government agreement between Gantz and Netanyahu to form a unity coalition, where Gantz demanded that no major appointments be made by this government since it's an interim emergency one. Um, so Ben Gvir announced that he's doing this. Gantz announced that this was a violation of the agreement. Netanyahu responded by saying, I see both sides, and we need a compromise. Started talking with both sides. Ben Gvir, being Ben Gvir, went ahead and started doing it anyway. He announced a successor to Perry, the head of the prison forces, and that replacement is a secretary to Ben Gvir, so one of his apparatchiks, um, basically. Gantz put a resolution to the government to annul that appointment. Ben Gvir put a resolution to the government to confirm that appointment, and that means that in the next cabinet meeting, Netanyahu has to decide whether he's voting for one or voting for both or voting against. That puts him in a very difficult situation. The upside of this is also that this puts the prison system in crisis at a moment when it has to deal with all the terrorists that are coming in from Gaza. So this is not the moment when you want the prison system to be in crisis. A couple of hours ago, Barak Ravid from Axios broke another story that is related to the dysfunction of the government. Um, President Biden called Netanyahu and asked him when he will be releasing money for the Palestinian Authority, money that Israel collects in taxes for them and through which they pay their salaries. If you remember, Finance Minister Smotrich, yeah, Smotrich again, said that under his watch, not a single dime will go to the Palestinian Authority. The United States pressured him because they feel, correctly, that without money at a moment of crisis, when Hamas is increasing in popularity, and if PA can't pay salaries, it may collapse, leading to a takeover by Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other organizations like that. Netanyahu is aware of this problem, and the solution he came to with Biden was to move the tax money to Norway, where it will be withheld until they can address the concerns the Israeli government has of that money going to Hamas. That's something that the Biden administration had agreed to. But Bibi, under pressure from, guess who? Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, backtracked. Biden, in their last conversation, mentioned this towards the end when Netanyahu insisted that he's not going to release the money for the Palestinian Authority. Biden got mad, said, this conversation is over, and hung up on Netanyahu, at least according to the report. Barak Ravid also added he talked to a official in the Biden administration, and he said, quote, the Biden administration has expressed concerns that an economic collapse of the PA could lead to a violent escalation in the occupied West Bank as a result of it not being able to pay its security forces their salaries, end quote. This is a very serious concern and something that Netanyahu should be just as worried about as Biden, more worried about than Biden because it affects Israel more than it affects the United States. Therefore, this official said, quote, the feeling was that the president is going out on a limb for Bibi every day, and when Bibi needs to give something back and take some political risk, he is unwilling to do it, end quote. So what we're seeing here repeatedly is stress within the coalition, stopping the government from being able to pursue the policies that it needs in order to win this war, manage this war properly, manage its diplomatic relations with its allies. Um, and Israel has massive opportunities here, once in a lifetime opportunities, to get a Palestinian Authority reformed along with its own demands, its own security demands, foreign ministry, put together a paper today looking to remove the UNRWA from Gaza and the West Bank. These are the sorts of things that Israel, once it has Gaza in its grasp, has the leverage to demand. When it has troops on the ground, when it's defeated its enemy, that's the time it can make these demands. That's the time that it can shape the peace agreement that will end this war and the horizon, the diplomatic and political horizon for a future that can lead to a more sustainable security structure. Because if Israel can't do this, if Israel can't land the properly at the end of this war, we're going to see solutions that Israel doesn't want, whether it's being forced by other actors or a failed state in Gaza, which no one can control, which will lead to more terrorism and environmental catastrophes, health catastrophes, etc. Or Hamas will stay there because Israel will not be able to reach an agreement. And then over the years, Israel's political position will erode and it may even be forced to withdraw in shame from Gaza with no political um, solution, like it did in Lebanon in 2000. Israel hung on in Lebanon for 20 years and couldn't reach a solution, couldn't reach an agreement, had to withdraw. These are the sorts of things I'm concerned about, and these are the sorts of things Netanyahu needs to be concerned about. But this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to shape these things. And Israel can't shape these things. This diplomatic horizon can't be formulated properly with this cabinet. Netanyahu can't give in to Ben-Gvir and Smotrich on every demand. They have no desire whatsoever to reach any kind of sustainable diplomatic architecture that can guarantee a better future for Israel and the Palestinians. And if Netanyahu is staying with this government, is going to listen to Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, he needs to be removed from power immediately because we will regret not getting this right for a very long time. Okay, having said all that, let's answer some questions from our viewers. Friend of the show and fellow suffering Mets fan Fred says the following. During the Yom Kippur War, General Ariel Sharon gained a reputation for often exceeding his orders. He certainly did, Fred. With the IDF leadership seeing things on the ground that the Netanyahu administration may be missing, do you see a possibility the IDF will begin doing some operations that might not have been necessarily authorized by the political leadership, at least in the realm of strategy and tactics? Well, first of all, anything the army does is technically in the realm of strategy or tactics, or the operational level in between them. But okay, never mind. That's my security studies PhD talking there. Um, so Ariel Sharon is a very specific individual who often did not follow orders. He did that in 1973. He did that again in 1982 as defense minister. In both cases, it kind of worked, especially in 73, but also in 82, because Ariel Sharon was a military genius. But that's not a really advisable way to run an army. And I don't think there's really anyone on Sharon's level, either in terms of force of personality or in terms of military ingenuity. So I guess the answer to your question is no, at least for right now. Um, Having said that, the more there's a breakdown in civil military relations, the more there's a sense that Netanyahu isn't really controlling things and isn't giving the kind of orders that the army wants, the less the army is going to consult with him, the more the army will do things independently. So I think that every time that Netanyahu won't meet with the army, every time that Netanyahu throws Herzi Halevi, that's the chief of staff, under the bus and those sorts of things, the army becomes less likely to take Netanyahu's interests and orders into account. So I think there is an erosion there. I think the army will be following their agenda more if Netanyahu is seen as not handling this correctly, which I think everyone is starting to feel right now. But I don't think it will reach the levels of, um, taking Oranim Katan to Oranim Gadol in 1982, or crossing the channel in Suez wider than ordered in 73, not stopping when Golda Meir asked him to, etc. I don't think it'll be anything like that. So the equivalent in this war would probably be Rafah. The IDF wants to go into Rafah. The government does not want to go into Rafah. I can't imagine them actually going in without government approval. So John Price asked a few questions, so I'll answer them in order. Are there any available estimates about the Gaza metro in northern Gaza? Was it bigger or smaller than expected? How much of that has been destroyed in the north? Okay, so all we have is estimates, and the estimates vary wildly. Before the war, the best estimates of how many miles the tunnels were said 300 miles worth of tunnels. Some of the IDF estimates at the time said 100 miles. The 300 miles seems a lot closer to the truth, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was more than that. The problem is that Israel doesn't know about the networks that it doesn't know about. Using Donald Rumsfeld's immortal line, there are unknown unknowns and known unknowns. And one of the known unknowns is how many tunnels there are. There are tunnels Israel hasn't found, so it doesn't really know. So I've seen Israel estimate that it's destroyed 70% of the tunnels. I don't believe that for a second. My guess is it's more like 20%, 25%, just an educated guess over there. The truth is, these the tunnels are just massive. There's more of them than anyone thought. I wouldn't be surprised if it was closer to 400 or 500 miles of tunnels. It's pretty insane. That's where all their effort over all these years has gone, where all their aid money has gone. And yeah, we don't really know. Oh, but it's a lot more than Israel expected. That's for sure. He also asks, why is the strategy for Khan Yunis seemingly different and less effective in comparison to northern Gaza? Why hasn't there been an effort to encircle all of Khan Yunis in order to reduce the fuel from reaching there? So the strategy in Khan Yunis has been different for a few reasons. One of the reasons is it's been decided not to reduce Khan Yunis to absolute rubble, partially because the U.S. asked for that, partially because it's not clear where all the refugees from Khan Yunis would go. So the style of fighting there is different. Also, a lot of the things that Israel thought would help to prevent the leadership in Gaza City from getting out did not work. So they didn't repeat a lot of that. Having said that, Israel has managed to surround Khan Yunis, at least the key areas in Khan Yunis, has managed to keep fuel from coming in above ground. Underground, of course, as we know, is a whole different story. Has been able to slow down bringing in supplies and reinforcements again because of the tunnels. They can't stop it from doing that. So on some level, encirclement has happened, but because of the tunnels, it's not complete. And I would caution against saying that what's happening in Khan Yunis is less effective. Remember, Israel has only been in Khan Yunis for, what's it been, like 10 days, 12 days, something along those lines. It took a long time in Gaza for it to reduce the entire city, and it did that by destroying every building. In Khan Yunis, it can't. I'm seeing that in Khan Yunis things are going relatively well. I'm not as concerned as you are. Abby Pinsker asks, how will Israel monitor a rebuild to make sure terrorist infrastructure isn't being recreated in Gaza? Well, that's the million-dollar question. Israel will not withdraw from Gaza without getting major security guarantees. And those guarantees will also include a strong element of Israel making sure for itself. So the Philadelphia route, the border between Israel and Egypt, will be taken over by the IDF. At least that's what the IDF wants. Israel's already building a security perimeter a kilometer deep inside the territory of Gaza that will be clean of the presence of any civilians. Basically, anyone who enters there will be shot. And it's creating in El Burej a central strip where the forces will be to be able to go in and raid anytime they see that infrastructure is being built. There will be mechanisms to try to watch everything coming in, but there's no easy answers. But Israel has managed overall to keep the level of arms coming into the West Bank lower than the Gaza Strip. And I think the most realistic thing we can expect is for the same thing to happen in Gaza. Not that no arms will come in, not that there won't be infrastructure, but that the infrastructure will be manageable and that through day-to-day raids, it will generally be controlled. But there's no reason to expect there's not going to be terrorist infrastructure in Gaza. There probably will always be terrorist infrastructure in Gaza. Finally, H. Johnny asks, what about tunnel warfare, which I am for? It would risk IDF soldiers, but the only way to kill Sinwar Def and rescue hostages is underground. I'm reading the IDF is searching for Sinwar, and nothing is happening day in and day out on this. The IDF would have located Sinwar by now. Why can't the IDF enter the tunnels under Khan Yunis and search for hostages Sinwar? Maybe send special forces in. In my opinion, it will speed up the war, which I am for. Can you comment on this? Well, this is something the IDF is not talking about, or at least is talking about very vaguely. But everything that you said that you think the IDF should be doing, the IDF is doing. They're in the tunnels. They're looking for hostages. They're looking for Sinwar. They're looking for Def. Um, Unfortunately, the Israeli intelligence, and this is, sad to say, as people who support Israel in this war, is having a lot of trouble locating Sinwar and Def. If they had eyes and ears on Sinwar and Def like they should have, none of this would have happened. October 7th wouldn't have happened. Um, so they're very often behind. They have a couple of times arrived to places that Sinwar was at before, but they arrived too late. So there's a cat and mouse game going on, and the mouse is consistently winning. The tunnels are dangerous, so every time Israel goes in there, it takes a long time. They take precautions. If you don't, the nightmare scenario is you let a bunch of soldiers in, 10, 20 from a special unit, and then the tunnels collapsed on them through booby traps, etc. You lose some of your absolute best fighters in one operation. So Israel's being very cautious. Cautious means slow. Slow means that these guys managed to get away. It's a real problem, but it's not one we have an immediate solution for. I've always said the focus needs to be on taking over the area above ground. Underground, I think Israel will have a lot of time to do later. In my opinion, and like you, I think we should be going to the tunnels. In my opinion, that's a lower priority right now than the ground war, because that can always be done later. Israel has already shown that even when it tries, its ability to get Sinwar and rescue hostages is very limited. So the focus, in my opinion, should be above ground. But Israel's doing everything that you said that it should be doing. It's doing it quite well, and since it's going in there and not losing a lot of soldiers, slowly and methodically, I actually think they're overdoing it. Okay, so that's the end for today's episode. If you like what I do here, consider supporting me on Patreon by going to Shael Media on Patreon. Also, check out my podcast, History of the Land of Israel podcast, and I will see you here again tomorrow.